Hello and welcome to a really great opportunity for us to talk to Ross and Christine Paterson, the founders of FieldPartners International. I'm Ben Gilbert. I am the latest addition to FieldPartner at this time, so it's a great honor to be here talking to you, Ross and Christine. Thank you for your time. What I thought we could do is just to give us a sort of context of some of the different cultural adjustments that you've made in the many years of your ministry and your journey together. Maybe we can start with where you both met. I understand that was in York. You were just about to start university, and Ross, you were working in a church there. Can you tell us a little bit about that time and how that happened?
Well, there are going to be two different versions of this. I was working with a brother called David Watson, who was a very anointed pastor. Church was growing fast, but there was a university, York University, so I would go up there and do Bible studies and things, and got distracted by this young lady that I saw. So on one occasion, just out of altruism, said, do you want me to run you home? Because I knew she lived quite a way away, didn't have a car. And then later we had a situation where I would babysit on a Monday night for David and Anne, for the children while they had a evening off, and I needed help to look after the children, so I invited her in to help me. Just organic growth.
Fantastic. And by that time, Ross, you had already had a calling to China, is that right?
That's right, yeah, because that happened in university, but was not clear of the way ahead at that point.
Okay. And so, Christine, you met Ross at that time, and where was that in your own faith journey? What point of time was that?
I had just come to faith a few months before, actually on January the 1st that year, 1968, and 2 weeks before my interview at York, and actually went to stay with David and Anne Watson, but could have met Ross then. He happened to be away speaking at a CU, I think, and so I didn't meet him until my fourth day at university. I'd just surrendered my life and was keen to get into university life and just find my way as a Christian there. And so I attended the Christian Union meeting, and Ross was the speaker. He was the speaker on the subject of My God is Real. And he was talking about his exploits behind the Iron Curtain, or the Lord's what the Lord had done through him making a trip behind the Iron Curtain to take Bibles and teaching materials to the Christians in different countries. I don't know which ones particularly that year, but I was so amazed at his experiences that he was relating, and I was just awestruck. And I thought, no, I didn't really think anything romantic at the time. I was just amazed by what I was hearing. I'm very impressed.
So, Ross, then you left for Taiwan, was it? Shortly after that.
Yeah.
And so just go through your emotions at the time when you actually arrived in Taiwan. What was that like for the first time you actually entered into the country?
I think when you go to a new country and you're going to work there, it's all really exciting for a brief period. And then reality hits you. I was single, so arrived April the 8th, 1969, many, many years ago, and by 7:30 the next morning I was in language school. So your day is programmed, you're not hanging around. It was 6 hours in language school, homework, get up in the morning, quiet time, spend time with the Lord, language school. But after a while that gets pressured, doesn't it? You know, you're lonely and this kind of thing. And then I was at that time living with a Christian family. They had a clinic, a Christian clinic, and I was helping the other doctor who was Finnish with complex English stuff, whatever you needed. Then I lived on the Baptist seminary under a teacher's house. They're very kind to me, let me live there rent-free, but I was basically in a little room with an outside loo and nothing, just a bed and a table and a kettle and no aircon, nothing. Wow. And that's where I mean, everybody's different. Some are married, some are this, some are that. For me, it was loneliness. And the rescue actually was sounds a bit bizarre now. We had a bachelor's club of single male missionaries who were not married, and I guess our fellowship, was strengthening to us because we were on the same path.
And those friendships, yeah.
Yeah.
So, Ross, we're sitting here today in 2023. If your current day Ross would be able to speak to that Ross arriving in Taiwan for the first time, what would you tell him before you arrived? Is there any advice you would give your young version of yourself before you got to Taiwan? Through your years of experience, what would you say to him? I
would say, and of course with the internet now, it's a different generation, I would say get some kind of mission culture training so you understand what it is to cross a culture, because you kind of assume I'm just going to carry on, but the culture is completely different. And get some more understanding of the country you're going to. I scarcely knew anything about Taiwan when I landed. I just knew that Jesus told me to go there. So I would say, without being too critical of the Ross then, do what you can to get particularly cross-cultural training, because those are the things that you're going to really struggle with. I just think off the top of my head, I'm in a taxi with a Chinese pastor, and I'm getting out first, so I paid for my bit, and he took the money from the taxi driver's hand and threw it out the window.
Oh, wow.
And because of the cultural thing of that he wanted to pay and not me, but that was interesting.
Yeah, and you sort of learn by those little incidents and little experiences along the way. Wow.
Yeah, you do. And the big thing I've always found, and this is particular maybe to Asians or the Chinese, is let's say we're in a meeting and we're discussing a topic. Quite often, if it's not on their turf, Chinese brothers and sisters won't say anything. But it's not they don't have anything to say. You need to draw them out. Whereas we just blab away. And it's like they feel, I don't want to speak till invited until I'm sure of my contribution. We feel, I'll just throw it in, and if somebody's got a better idea, I'll take it back again.
Right.
And you might completely miss the value they have unless you realize, Sister Leo, would you contribute, please?
Wow, yeah. So Christine, coming to you now, we fast forward a little bit. Ross comes back to the UK. You get married through a series of events, and we're skipping over a lot, I know. But your story in that while Ross was in Taiwan, what was going through your mind?
Well, when Ross left, because as he said, we would babysit, and so we had about 3 weeks where we would get together that way, and then on the third time, he announced that he was leaving to go to Taiwan. So I thought, oh, okay, well, and I've just started my university course, so I'll wait then. But he wanted a clean break because he wanted to just not have any complications, which I perfectly understand now. But at the time I was stunned. But I said, okay, Lord, if I believe that you're in this, so I'm willing to wait. So I'll give you my university years. So I had a 4-year course. So 3 years later, I was in my final year. I'd heard that Ross was coming back. And then I got this mysterious invitation from David Watson, the same vicar, who said, have you got anyone that you're seeing at the moment? And I thought, that's a weird question to be asking me. And Ross had asked him to find out if I had anyone in my life.
Done some homework.
Not knowing that I had, kept my promise to the Lord that I wouldn't get involved with anyone else until this was resolved. So then I got a letter from Ross saying he was coming back. So we met on Charing Cross Station under the clock tower, and he took me back to his home. So naturally, I was hearing wedding bells, because this was exactly what I'd prayed for. Yeah. That, before I graduated, this relationship would be resolved. And then he asked me a difficult question, because it's not something I'd thought about. As far as I was concerned, if God was leading us together, I would be a Ruth, where I didn't need a particular call myself, I would go where he went. You know, what Ruth said to Naomi, where you go, I will go. Or I can't remember the actual wording of the verse, but so he then said to me, do you have a call to China? And I blurt. I mean, I tend to blurt. I say the first thing that comes into my head. Well, the obvious place would be Africa, wouldn't it? Because I'd been born and brought up in Africa.
We'll get to that bit in a minute.
Yeah. So he took that as a no, because he had seen so many, complications from a wife not having a sense of call. And so he broke it off again. And now that really was stunning to me. Nobody knew that there was anything at all between us, apart from David Watson. And I think I'd told my parents. And then one friend guessed. But anyway, so I was absolutely rug pulled out from under my feet. I just didn't know what to make of this. And I said, Lord, okay, but I can't trust a call to China now, because I would always be thinking I'd cooked it. So you're going to have to change his mind. And then I, out of the blue, I went to hear Brother Andrew. This was I was doing student work myself, so went to hear Brother Andrew, I'd only ever heard speak about the Iron Curtain and the Christian persecuted church behind the Iron Curtain. And on this occasion, he was speaking about the persecuted church in China. And he made a very specific call. If any of you here feel that God is calling you to serve the church in China, then come to the front, but not for any other reason. So I thought, if I'd never heard of Ross Patterson, would I believe that God was calling me to China right now? And the answer was yes. So I went forward.
That's interesting. So in that moment, if you think back to that moment when you were listening to that, how did you sort of discern? Was the experience just so deep that you knew it was beyond the history that you'd had with Ross up until that point, that it was a specific calling on your life? How did you discern that? What was your spirit
I think I think the Lord knows how we're wired. I'm a very spontaneous person, and I just felt absolutely clear that this was the next challenge. That it was and also, I think I'm a very I used to call myself a spaniel. Because I was faithful to one person. I knew that I couldn't get involved with anybody else until this relationship was sorted out. And in fact, I then landed up being very unfair to another guy I dated. I was just trying to get Ross out of my system, because when eventually things started to come together, I had to say to this other guy, "Look, I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
Things are coming together with Ross now, so
yeah.
I'm going to have to."
So how soon after that meeting did you tell Ross that you had a call to?
I didn't.
You didn't tell him?
No, I didn't tell him anything.
So how did he find out?
A friend behind my back wrote to him.
Oh, wow.
And said, she's got a call to China now. And so he wrote to her. And what was the word? Like Rommel in the desert, I need a picture of the enemy.
I never said that.
I need a picture anyway, so she came and rifled through my stuff and found a picture of me and sent it to him. And I didn't know any of this.
Wow.
So.
And then you came back to UK for a furlough visit or something after that? And is at that point you got married, was it? Okay.
Yeah, 1975.
Right, so again, same thing. We met under the clock tower at Charing Cross Station. He took me back to his parents, and I was half expecting the same thing to happen again. But that evening, he popped the question, and my answer to him was, "Do you really need to ask?" I never said yes.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I waited 6.5 years.
Yeah. Well, the evidence is clear now.
I hope so.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, how much time was it after you were married before then you both moved out to Taiwan?
Well, this is complicated because at that time, Taiwan, if you exceeded, was it 2 months or 3? 3 months out of the country, you had to reapply for the visa from ground zero. So I had to be back within 3 months from the clock tower to leaving the country. So I went back first.
Okay.
And
I also had a job to work out my notice, because I was working in student work. And normally it would be a 3-year appointment, but this was almost up to 2 years, so I worked out my notice for 2 years.
So then, Christine, you then arriving in Taiwan when Ross was already there, he's immersed himself in the language, he's familiar with the culture already, he's got his network of bachelor friends now that is redundant now because you're married. Okay.
Yeah, he was the last one to
I was the last.
Yeah. So you arrived in Taiwan. Just talk us through the emotions of actually arriving in a country that you've never been to before.
Well, I think, I say I'm spontaneous, but I also don't necessarily think through the implications. And the thought that I was going to be with Ross, I barely knew him. We barely knew each other. And I certainly didn't know much about Taiwan, and I didn't know anything at all about the culture. I was quite interested in learning the language. I enjoy languages, but I think my problem is discerning the difference between, getting used to a new relationship, a new marriage relationship with someone I barely knew, and encountering a culture about which I knew nothing. So we had a very rough start to our marriage, I would say. And later somebody said, well, the first 5 years are the hardest. I was very glad to have that word of wisdom, because we did, and I think looking back on it, I was very naive, and this whole issue of not having had training. Ross didn't have it, I didn't have it. I didn't know what to expect, and so we had a lot of adjustments to make right there. And plus, I was always comparing. I was looking for the familiar, and I was comparing Chinese culture with African culture, and of course they're nothing like each other. And Ross would get quite frustrated with me because I get, that reminds me of the African dukas or something, the sort of the way the shops are set up. And I think he felt that I wasn't making any effort to adjust because I was wanting it to be like my past. So I don't know, that's what you thought, but that's what I interpreted from that. But anyway, so I was very mixed up, I think, but at the same time, very keen to learn the language. And so I would immerse myself like he had in language study. And also the other thing he'd said was, we're not going to consider having a family until you've got the language. So that was another motivation, because I very, very much wanted to start a family.
So then we'll jump back, Christine, in your history, back to your childhood. You were born in Burundi, grown up in Rwanda for the first 13 years of your life.
Right. Went to school in Uganda and Kenya. Right,
okay. So a very very different African contextual upbringing. I can understand why you're kind of relating that to your current Christine just arriving in Taiwan. But just talk us through a little bit of that upbringing, how you dealt with that, because you moved back to the UK when you were 13. What was that transition like, and what did UK feel like? I mean, your passport says you're from the UK. Your home culture is UK in theory. Talk us through that period of your life when you actually arrived back in the UK as a 13-year-old.
Okay, well, now I have a context for it because I have an identity which is third culture kid. So the first culture is your passport culture, the second culture is your host culture, your third culture is the one that you form with other people like you. Back then, I had absolutely no context for it. So I was feeling, I'd been told I was going home to go to school. And when I arrived, I've never felt more alien and more away from home. Because home was back in Africa with, wide open spaces and safaris and friendly African faces and the music and the colour and all that. And here I was, freezing cold, on the north coast of Wales at a boarding school. People I didn't know, pop music, fashion, totally outside of my interest or knowledge. And I landed up feeling so angry with God, angry with my parents, angry with my circumstances, because I knew I didn't belong and I didn't know how to belong. So for a long time, that kind of fueled a rebellion in me. and it lasted. And actually, my parents heard back in Africa that I was really struggling, and not only I, but my brother as well. So as soon as they heard that, my mother was on a flight home. And so she kind of came and gave us a home, and then my dad followed soon after. They took 5 years out just to be there for us, which was, I mean, I think it rescued my brother and myself, and my sister was also very, very depressed. So, you know, all of us, I think, needed that time with our parents.
Did you realise at the time that what your parents were sacrificing or giving up?
No. All that mattered was that they were home.
Right.
And they gave a home to us and there was a question of what they were going to do. Now they was surprisingly back in England, and they were offered to be on staff because they could offer the school the subjects that the school was needing to fill at the time. And I said, not only are you not coming here, but I'm leaving. So they had the wisdom to take me away. And so I did my A-levels in London.
Okay.
And there, it's like my rebellion meant nothing. You know, all the kids it was actually the direct grant school that my mother had been head girl, and so she'd got me into this very prestigious school. And all the kids were on good terms with the teachers, and here was I built my identity on rebellion, and it meant nothing. And I realised I couldn't study as well as they did, and I had nothing going for me, so I got even more depressed, even more angry, and eventually I went to stay with a friend who shared the gospel with me, and shared especially a Bible verse that just peeled me open, and I surrendered my life. And at that point, I thought I had resolved everything from my past. I was able to reconcile with my parents, and that all happened 2 weeks before.
2 weeks
I
before you
landed
met.
going for my interview.
Yeah. So I want to pick up on that question about home, where home is. When you arrived in Taiwan together as a married couple, was that an immediate sense of this is home now, or how long did it take before you felt, okay, this is our home, or did it feel like home? What was that like?
Personally, I wanted to make a home where the two of us could be at home, but I don't know whether I think there was a lot of stuff going on for both of us, I think, because I think we both had kind of built our little castles in the air. I certainly had, and I think Ross was thinking that to have a companion, but then finding out that I was actually still very much at odds with myself in that context. So I don't know whether he landed up feeling it was home or not.
I think part of the problem was in Taipei, I was doing student work, so I think it was a home in a sense, at least for me, because I'd lived there 6 years already. I had work colleagues and friends. We moved to the middle of the island. The Lord had spoken to me a few years before to start gospel teams, because I'd been on operation mobilization teams and realized the value. So we crafted that into teams that went for a week to the countryside. I mean, I've been to places a lot of Taiwanese have never been to, because you're in rural. And we slept on the floor of churches with a haimiandian, a thin mattress, rubber mattress, and exciting things happened, like the girls all were in a large mosquito net thing together, and a rat got in one night and you couldn't get out, and all this kind of thing. Because the work was growing, we moved to the middle of the island, and I think that was actually very disruptive, because for a couple of reasons, you moved away from the environment. I had been settled, and Christine could have been in Taipei, plus the guy that I moved to be with and his wife hooked off back to Taipei quite quickly, kind of, in a sense, leaving us down there. And I think it kind of left us a bit marooned at that point. So no, it wasn't a home kind of thing. You asked me earlier on, what would I say to the younger Ross? Well, I would say to the 1975 getting married Ross, read some books and get some understanding on marriage, because I was doing like 6 weeks of gospel team, and I'd come back at the weekend, but then be away for a week, and leaving Christine, you know, in this situation that was quite difficult for us. So feel I didn't do well there either.
Yeah.
Well, we also didn't have anyone really nobody around us to counsel us or to help us through.
No.
You know, so that I would bet there are a lot of wives out there, for example, who have feel as though their husbands are, you know, they know what they're about, but very much not knowing who they are and what their role is. You know, you want to be as supportive as you can, but I was very much wanting to have a baby because I wanted to feel as though I've got something that I'm bringing to this, you know, other than just cooking and cleaning and you know, learning language.
Yeah.
And it was a new community. I mean, it was just new built, and we rented a house. And I can remember, it's hot in Taiwan in the summer, so we put an aircon in. Our next door neighbor was upset because it made too much noise, you know. So, what do you mean?
All those little details you don't know until you actually arrive and do something like that. Yeah. And so it sounds like a lot of those early challenges were just working out life together as a married couple, but in amongst that, the complexity of doing that in a country where there's things which are not familiar.
Yeah, I think what Christine said, to have had an older missionary couple, somebody you could talk to, actually, at that stage would have been extremely helpful. And because I went as 6 years before as a single missionary without an agency, and worked with and under the Chinese, and that's where the cultural thing hits the wall, because they're not particularly concerned about you on that level, and probably rightly so. But if you were all Brits or all Chinese, they might be thinking, well, they're newly married, so what can we do to make it easier? They're not thinking in those terms at all, and that is a cross-cultural jolt, I suppose.
And I remember going to a big camp where, you know, I was the newbie, and so a big campsite where all the students were together and the leaders of the Christian work were together, and it was I was there married to an advisor, but having absolutely no clue myself and not enough language, and because I was the newbie, everybody was looking at me. And the thing is that, you know, in Western culture we tend to break up into smaller groups and get to talk to each other in small groups, but all eyes were on me because I was the newbie, and I just wanted to crawl under a rock and disappear. Please don't all look at me. Please don't, you know, make it about me. You know, just get on with, you know, something else. So for me, a lot of the stuff I had because that's the way they are. It's a collective society. They don't so much break up into small things and do it in the smaller. And I had no context for that either, you know. So, and you know, so to not to have had anyone that we could talk to who could help to say, well, actually, what you're going through is culture shock, and also you're newly married, so there are a lot of added layers to this. We had none of that.
What about friendships with the Taiwanese people that you were working with? How did you navigate that, and what sort of did you learn about? I mean, you've had some experience there already, but then as a married couple relating to other families, other couples who are from Taiwan, was there anything in those friendships that developed over time which might help others who are in a similar situation where maybe it doesn't work quite as it would, say, in the UK or the US or in a Western context?
We had missionary friends, 2 missionary couples. I give Kevin and Karen and Kurt and Hare. I think particularly Kurt and Hare, who were a Dutch couple my age but married earlier. As much actually for the wife, I think, you know, you having friendship with Hare, I think that's important. For me, I mean, bizarrely, during the 2 years of language school, one of the teachers, a lady teacher, invited me to her house because they had kids slightly younger than me, but the eldest wasn't much younger. And that actually became my family in Taiwan. I mean, I went there every Friday night, watched TV, had a meal with them. They called me Ba Lao Da. Ba is my Chinese name. Lao Da means elder brother. So I was kind of, I mean, we had a meal with her earlier this year. She's 96
Wow.
now. So the relationship has sustained.
She then became my teacher as well.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay, amazing.
Yeah. And so with the work relationships, you work closely, you met them every day, you prayed together, you did camps together. Some of them became friends, but not friends that you could really open your heart to. I mean, a missionary has to face, in certain situations, that you're expected to be different. So it's like you're not supposed to have many personal feelings that you want to share with people. And I guess in some contexts you're going to find that. I would find that more, I think, in one or two contexts today. But you have probably to find that in missionary friends who are going through the same thing as yourself. So if you're not with an agency, I think building good friendships, if I could say this, I think particularly for wives, actually, is absolutely critical.
It's one of the essentials.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then you had your first daughter, Debs, while you were in Taiwan. How old was Debs? Because at a certain point you came back to the UK.
Yeah.
What age was Debs at that time?
Well, at that point, Deng Xiaoping took over China, and he had a policy called the Full Modernizations, which meant they needed Western help, Western technology, Western investment, because the idea was to catch up with Japan by the year 2000, which they did actually. So China began to open up. So in order to move to work to China, you had to leave Taiwan, because there were, at that stage, absolutely no communication between the two of them. So Debs was about 1, I think, when we left.
It was within her first year. Basically, when she was born, my parents said, "We're never going to meet our granddaughter if you don't come out to Africa, because our furloughs are never going to coincide." So they paid for us to go out to Rwanda to visit them. And while we were there, also, we met these three mainlanders who were kind of exporting communism, quotes.
Ping pong diplomacy.
Ping pong diplomacy.
In Rwanda.
In Rwanda.
Yes, yeah.
They were teaching the Africans basketball and table tennis.
Right. Okay.
Hence the ping pong. And anyway, Ross shared the gospel with them, and I and my whole team went. And they said, "This is amazing news. We've never heard anything like it. You must come to our country."
Oh wow.
So that was kind of felt like a Macedonian call. And so we went back to our sending church in north of England in Yorkshire. And they said, "Yeah, that sounds like God, so see if you can find a way." So Debs by then was less than 6 months, I think.
Okay.
So we came back to Taiwan, we sorted out our affairs, gave everything away, and said, if we ever come back, it's ours, otherwise it's yours. And then we set off to America on the proceeds of our car to see whether we could find a way of getting into China. And to our absolute amazement and disappointment, nothing happened.
Wow.
So we landed up back in York by her first birthday. We were back in York.
So you both received a really clear call in Rwanda, and this time the calling came to both of you at the same time.
Yeah.
That must have been quite a shock then, not being able to get into China. So what happened after you sort of discovered that you weren't able to get into China as you thought you might have? What happened at that point?
Well, we went back to England, and OMF, the old China Inner Mission Overseas Missionary Fellowship, approached me and said, look, everybody was opening up China ministry because it had been closed during the Cultural Revolution, and said, would you take over the rebuilding in England. They had China coordinators in America and Germany, and a very special brother, seasoned China missionary called David Aidney. And I mean that was a dream ticket, because these are the people who have the experience from the past of China. I mean, CIM always has been the greatest missionary organization to China there's been. As the founder of 3 organizations involved with China, I'm absolutely ready to say that. they were the people. And I met with one of the old guard, a mighty man of God called Leslie Lyle, who said, "You've been in Taiwan, you know nothing about China." You know, you're put in your place. And got opportunities to go into China, and then through OMF got to know key people in Hong Kong and this kind of thing, which was critical for the future.
So readjusting then back into the UK, if we just talk about that for a little while, how was life? We talk about reverse culture shock. Did you experience some of that now with a little 1-year-old?
Re-entry.
I maintain that Ross has made very, very sure that he's never had to go through that again. Because it was wretched. It was so difficult.
Is it? In what way?
Well, because he had such a clear sense of who he was and what God was doing and what have you in Taiwan, and now we'd come back to the UK, and it's like this is before things really took off with OMF, but I think to start with there was just a sense of nobody gets us. Now, we'd never heard of culture shock even, let alone reverse culture shock, but we went through it in a big way at that time. And we were given the most basic accommodation to live in, and people didn't really consider we'd basically used up all our savings from the car on going to America, so we landed up with almost nothing coming back.
Wow.
And we'd have people asking us, how are you doing financially? And we'd try to explain, and they said, "Oh, amazing, that's okay."
I mean, the Lord provided. I mean, we didn't have any money, and one day a double bed arrived, because literally an old lady had moved out of the house and somebody had bought it, so we were living in it. And the bed was broken, and it had rising damp, and
no heating, nothing.
Sounds horrendous.
and
we had a baby and another one on the way.
And so one day a bed arrived, and this company's delivering it. I said, "Sorry, that isn't ours." They said, "Well, it's got your address here, anyway." And the fridge arrived and that kind of thing. So yeah, there was that. The other side of it was, I think the church, as happens, the church had changed a lot, and the kind of raw original vision that seemed to be there of prayer and evangelism and this kind of thing seemed to have moved into a, more sophisticated thing, if you call it that. And I just didn't feel that we felt really comfortable there, actually, even though I was an elder and that kind of thing.
So you were there quite a number of years before you left the UK again after that. That must have been quite a frustrating time, was it?
Yep. Let's leave it there. Well, I at least was doing China stuff with OMF, and then launched Derek Prince Ministries China, because I was out praying and fasting on the racecourse, a great place to walk and commune with the Lord, and he said, "Take Derek Prince into China." And so I had begun that, was making trips to Taiwan, to Hong Kong. Then we started what was then CCSM, Chinese Church Support Ministries. So it was busy.
And meantime, planted a church as well.
Oh yeah, planted a church, in
Just
spare
that.
time. And then after a few years, I said, "Lord, I'm doing 3 things at the same time." He said, "Well, do what I told you." So I handed over the church and just continued with the China stuff. And also, CCSM, we developed internationally. I felt the Lord said, develop internationally, so New Zealand, Australia, America, we began to, plant bases that were all doing China ministry.
Okay, so then you had 4 more daughters in that time, so five children, and then it came to an opportunity where then you moved out of the UK again, but this time with 5 children.
Yes.
What the last time that happened, it was just that you as a newly married couple. Now you've got 5 children. So arriving in Singapore with 5 children, how was that as a family now?
Yeah, that was. I'll sum it up, and Christine can fill in the details. If I think of the most difficult time of our lives, I think that scores high on the Richter scale.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, bear in mind, we still don't yet have culture shock in our vocabulary. You know, you don't think in terms of what this is doing. And basically, we had visited Singapore. We'd made friends. We had people who were inviting us, who were really excited that we were coming. We've got a guy who had, you know, made an offer of a job so that Ross could have a visa. But anyway, so we arrive in that in this context with 5 kids who, you know, Ross had done his due diligence. He had gone on a visit. We'd gone there as a couple and, you know, met all these people, and they were all enthusiastic. Then he'd done his due diligence, had gone and, you know, he'd looked into the education. We knew we had a home, a house, we had a vehicle, we had an office. And it looked like all the ducks were in a row. And then we land on the runway and everything falls apart.
So you'd done all the preparation this time?
Yeah.
As much as you
said,
could.
I'm going to provide a house for you. Business went south, said can't do it. Just a series of things like that. And the difficulty was school. Singapore is an excellent education system, but you need to be in from year 1. And our kids, Debs was 16 at the time, and it was so different from England. I mean, that was, to the then Ross, I would say, dig a little deeper than you did. You did quite well, but
didn't go quite far enough. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, the school that we went to, we were told was an international school. When we got there, they were the only white-skinned on the campus.
Because international means Indonesian
or Japanese or, you know, all other Asians, you know. So, so we've been through the whole thing. We've got the education permits from the Ministry of Education. We've got the uniform. We've done everything. And on day 1, we realised this is absolutely not going to work.
It's not working.
They lasted it out for 2 weeks.
Wow.
And we just had to start again from scratch.
Like Hannah, our second daughter's first day in school, the teacher cracked a joke in Hokkien, in dialect, which clearly
and all the kids laughed.
All the kids laughed and seemed to be against her. It's a very local school, so a girl with every good intent came up to her and said, "Want to go toilet lah?" And she had no idea what the girl was saying, which was, "Do you want to go to the toilet?" So essentially came out of there in tears, and
that must have been hard as parents to see your children go through that.
And the other thing was getting them there, because there were 3-4 different schools.
Well, eventually, when we decided this particular school was not going to work, so Hannah was starting her GCSE course, so we had to get her into. There was a place going at United World College, but that was 15,000 Singapore dollars a year. And that was basically our budget for education for all 5 of them. But then there was a Christian school that was starting that could take Sharon. And then we put the twins into a local school, and a different local school with a Christian headmistress who was very, very sympathetic and open to us. And then Debs had a place in the top junior college, but she hadn't started yet because the course was only due to start in January, and this was September. Anyway, long story short, 4 different campuses, and they're starting and finishing at different times of day.
Complicated.
So I was going around the whole of Singapore all day, driving the kids to school or picking them up from school.
Driving means we had an old, clapped-out Volkswagen van that the head gasket fairly regularly blew.
With great embarrassment to our kids to start with. Anyway, and I learned the road system very quickly.
When you had your calling, I bet you didn't imagine that it was going to be sat in traffic in Singapore.
I said to the Lord, this cannot be right. This can't be your plan.
Well, I know some of the story because that's where then our two families connected because I went to Hebron and your children all went to Hebron at the same time. So
your dad was the man. Your dad was the man because basically I don't have any places but come anyway.
But I mean, the story that led up to that was Ross went back to the UK and was sharing in the church what was going on, or with the board, I think. Board. And the board said, you must take your family away from Singapore over Christmas, regroup as a family and just, be together. So we landed up going to Hua Hin, to a lovely retreat centre run by some other mutual friends, the McKnights. And it was there that Barry McKnight shared with us about Hebron, because that's where their kids went. And so we felt, boarding school was not in our ideal
not in your radar?
For our kids.
Yeah.
But you went to boarding school when you were a child, and now you're suddenly faced with sending your own children to boarding school. How did that play out? What were your emotions at the time?
Basically, if there had been any other route that we could see, short of going back to England, because a lot of people were saying, if it's this tough, surely you got it wrong. You should just give up and go home.
Yeah.
And we felt, that's not. But I had got myself very depressed, from the point of view of I don't see any way out of this. My feeling was, if this is the door the Lord has opened, then we need to go through it, and at least it'll be 5 of them in one place. When I was at boarding school in Africa, I was on my own. I was the youngest, so there's a big gap between me and my brother, and we were never in the same school together.
But the lesson is, the generic mission lesson is education on the field often is not easy. That's something in the work we're doing with the Chinese now, that's something the Chinese are facing, because at least some English systems have schools in Malaysia or schools in, used to be Northwest China and so on. There's nothing for the Chinese. So, in a sense, the best thing I can say on that is, if you're struggling with that, it's not unusual. It's what happens often, not always, because some situations are quite different. But the Lord provides. The Lord will lead.
Because you blueprint, so you've got to find out what the specific route is that's right for you.
It's everything we're saying, and we haven't really said it so far, is a dependence on the Lord. What mission life does is thrust you into either He answers prayer and He provides in the difficult place, call unto me in the day of trouble and I will answer you, or you better not go, actually, honestly. And that side of it, I think we'd want to stress that it isn't a job, it's a walk with the Lord. And it's an intense walk with the Lord that throws you into situations that sometimes are about laying hold of Him and finding Him in a hard place. Other times are saying, here I stand. At that time I went back to England and met with the board, and they just roasted me. And I'm thinking, you guys, I actually walked out of there and said, if I didn't fear the Lord and know He'd called me, for what you've done, I'd walk away from the whole thing. Because I think none of them understood what it is to face what we were facing. They're back in England in their regulated lifestyles. We weren't. And what we can say many years afterwards is the Lord did an amazing job with each of our daughters. We are immensely proud of each one of them, actually.
Yeah, and I think, that's interesting how you highlight that, is sort of the perception from ascending church or from people who are involved in mission from this side of the equation, in the UK say, it's easy to overlook the challenges. Like when you arrived in Taiwan, you were working it out as a newly married couple. I mean, that was your biggest challenge right in front of you. And then in Singapore, working out schooling with your 5 children. Like those very close up personal challenges, you know, we often assume from the UK, oh, it's going to be reaching the most unreached and all the challenges that come with mission. And of course that's challenging as well, but it's like the nitty gritty family stuff often, which can be the most difficult to work through.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing that, because
well, kids can be, your children, the soft underbelly. That's who the devil is going to go for. And, you know, the sending church needs to be praying for mission families and mission kids, because, I think one of your brothers at one point was going south, and look at him now, tremendous man of God. No details, sorry.
No details. Well, I'll hold my hand up and say that happened to me as well. So not to the extent of my brother, but I think that's a good way of putting it. The soft underbelly, really praying protection.
And you know, wounds happen. You know, they happen to parents, they happen to kids.
Happen to kids, yeah.
Sometimes, you know, I think we just need to have room for healing to happen later, even if wounds shouldn't have happened in the first place. You know, just make space for. And why does God allow things? Often because He brings us deeper as a result, and we've got more to say to others who hurt. You know. So I wouldn't volunteer to go back to that time.
No.
But I wouldn't, in some senses, change it either.
But even you just sharing from that time, I think for me and for others listening, I think it's such a deep insight into like what it's really like, what it feels like, and seeing God work through it and provide through it. So thank you for sharing.
I think, you know, we need to see that any calling to serve the Lord is spiritual warfare, but in mission you're moving on to territory that often the enemy doesn't want to yield, Satan doesn't want to yield, and he's going to throw stuff at you that are difficult. And also in the middle of it there's the humorous bits. The kids and Christine were all in the early time down in India, and I was living alone in our house in Singapore, and they all came back, 6 women, right? 5 daughters and Christine, and within 2 weeks the Singapore Water Board, because water is very valuable in Singapore, came round, said, "Sir, we think you have a leak." Because your bill is rocketed up. I said, "I don't have a leak. There's 6 women in the house."
That's good. Okay, I've got one eye on time, so I don't want to keep you too long. But just now, I mean, we could go on talking forever. Like, it's so good about what you're sharing. But now you're in the UK now, having recently re-entered the UK, and this is after years and years of mission. Ross, now you're re-entering back into the UK. Are there any thoughts or reflections in your current experience this year in this adjustment which you're kind of working through and living through? Is it any different to how it was, 30 years ago when you did it?
Well, I would say 2 things. One is the work I do is very much online. I mean, this morning I had a 2.5 hour Zoom with Taiwan and Malaysia, planning a really exciting mission meeting with Chinese missionaries. We have team in Canada, we have team in New Zealand, we have team all over the place in the States. So actually my work day is not much different, it's just in a different seat in a different country. I think what is difficult is coming back after so long, and you in Taiwan, I'm going to be there in a few weeks' time, you're preaching on Sunday, this kind of thing. Here, I don't know anybody. And if I could say this, nobody knows me. So you're thinking, I've had all these years to preach in Chinese, and it's so much easier to preach in your first language, and I got no opportunity to do it. Plus church, you've got to start rebuilding from zero. And what is more difficult is, God has used you, and you're recognized, if I could say that, in the church circles you move in, and respected because you've walked the talk for many years. Here, if you walk into a church, oh, we've got somebody new, isn't that nice? Which is, there's nothing wrong with that, but that lovely story where American missionary years and years ago came back on a ship from Africa, and Roosevelt was on the ship because he'd been hunting for a couple of weeks, on safari, whatever they call it. And there's a New York band, and everybody's there, and the president's here, and then the missionary comes off, and nobody's there to greet them. And he's really low, and his wife says, well, what's your problem? And he said, well, we come home, and nobody cares. She said, but you're not home yet. Meaning the Lord knows that you're going to be with him soon.
Yeah. What about for you, Christine, in this time?
Well, it's funny, because in between, after all those events in Singapore, I attended a seminar which completely opened things up for me on the whole subject of transition. And, that's where I got my label for myself as a third culture kid. That's where I understood about the kind of constant changes that you go through in a cross-cultural lifestyle. And then the whole thing of how you prepare yourself for each change. So the idea is to build a raft. So reconcile with anybody that you've got an issue with in your current location. Then you look to affirm the stuff that was good, and you look to say good farewells, to places and to people that you want to say, and then you think destinations. So I had that in the back of my mind all this past year before coming home. And I feel as though it's, the Lord gave us amazing experiences of people coming out of the woodwork wanting to say goodbye. So we had some really good farewells. And, coming back, I feel as though it's made it a qualitatively difference because of awareness. And this is why I feel, what we're about in FieldPartner is so urgently needed. Because when people have awareness, it's not necessarily the challenges are going to be less, but you're more equipped to handle them. You've got more tools, more things that that you can do. To it's not just about a hotline to heaven and a relationship with Him, although that's absolutely vital. There's also the other things that can help to equip you. So, I feel as though I've made a transition back here. I don't think Ross has yet, because he's still actually...
Keep moving, buddy.
he's also, there's still more of a transition going on for both of us. Plus, as he said, where do we belong now? Where do we find a place to call our own in terms of church? We've got a beautiful home that Lord has provided. So there are a lot of things to celebrate, a lot of highlights, but there are still more challenges to face.
And what you're doing with FieldPartner is such a vital piece of encouragement, actually, and equipping for people who are working in mission, people who are both here in the UK involved in it, but more vitally people who are cross-culturally working. So, and sharing a little bit of your story. I know we haven't had a huge amount of time to go into depth, but just these sort of gems of knowledge and advice that you've been able to share in the last few minutes has been really a privilege to listen to. So
well, let me just add this, that the other FieldPartner, the other side is the Chinese side. The next wave of missionaries, we've had the Koreans and they're still doing a wonderful job, will be the Mainland Chinese, but they're untrained. So as in the English, it's critical that we be aware of these things. Our opportunity is to give that same understanding to the Chinese. We have a friend in North Africa who says in his 15 years there, his mainland Chinese, between 100 and 200 have come out of China and have gone back because they're not trained. So, we have this opportunity in the English side and the Chinese side actually to make a difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Ross. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Ben.